Here's a quick take on how to introduce main characters in a movie. The thing that movies do more powerfully than any other medium is the intense way with which we connect with the characters, if it's done right. It's a common mistake I see, especially in student films, but also in professional films and often in independent films, that filmmakers put a character up on the screen and they just expect us to care about the character. And it's a sad reality, but the audience doesn't care until we draw them in and make them care. And there's a process to do that. The progression of audience involvement with a character, it goes in an arc over the length of the movie. And it starts out with curiosity. Curiosity is what draws us in the beginning and makes us start to care about what's going to happen. Later on, we become sympathetic with the character to a certain extent, or we may hate the character too, but we get deeper involvement. And eventually, by the end of the movie, we end up with a very intense involvement and real connection with the character. But the beginning is putting the hook in them and getting them curious, because that opens their mind and allows them to go to those other steps. And the way you get them curious is through cinematic techniques rather than words. By that I mean pictures and sounds. This is another common mistake I see, where filmmakers will use dialogue or narration to tell us about the character. Now, the words, the facts about the character, that may be useful, but they're not nearly as useful as what we sometimes call the felt sense of the character, the physicality, the weight of the character, the color of the character, the psychology of the character, the rhythms, the sound of the character, the texture, even the smell of the character that you can get from a good movie, right? All these things that involve us and get us to invest our own imagination in this character. So if you think of a character like Clint Eastwood's classic Man with No Name in the spaghetti westerns that he did early in his career, the audience was given no biographical information about that character, not even his name. But boy, did you have a feeling for that guy. And that's what we want to do. You create this feeling of knowing the character so that then we begin to say, well, what's he going to do? And that's what keeps us on the edge of our seat. That's what keeps us watching. Now, there's one other technique that great filmmakers have known intuitively that has now been proven with brain research. And that is that partial images or unclear images, rather than full-on clear images, actually arouse the imagination and get an audience more curious. It works. And if you will watch the deep dive episode that I do, I'm going to go into these principles in a little bit more depth. And we'll take a look at how 5 different filmmakers have used these techniques to draw you into a character, to put the hook into you. And there isn't time to do that in this quick take episode. But here's what I will do. I will show you just the first 2 seconds. That's 48 frames of film to see how these 5 filmmakers used this principle of a partial image to trigger the imaginative brain and start to put the hook into the audience so they get curious. The movies we're going to look at are Breakfast at Tiffany's, In the Heat of the Night, Yojimbo, Matilda, and The Big Lebowski. Breakfast at Tiffany's opens with this extreme long shot of this taxi cab pulling up in an empty street in the morning in New York. And we can kind of see her a little bit through the glass there. And then we get just a little quick glimpse of her there. But then I'm going to start from right here, and I'll give you 48 frames. So that's it. That's all we get to see of Audrey Hepburn is her back in an extreme long shot. We can see that she's elegantly dressed, that she's wearing jewelry. We can see that her hair is elegantly done, but we haven't seen her face. We don't know anything about her. And all this shot does is trigger us to start wondering who this character is and where this story's going. In the Heat of the Night begins with a montage over music, and it sets the scene of this small town in Mississippi and a train pulling in. And we get this signboard that's welcoming us to this small town in Mississippi, and then the train pulls to a stop. And the porter gets off, puts down a step, and a figure steps off, and we'll take 48 frames from here because this is the introduction of Sidney Poitier as the character of Virgil Tibbs. Okay. In 2 seconds, all we get to see is that he is well-dressed. He's got nice shoes. He's got a nice suitcase. And he has a hand with dark skin. That's all we see. All we get to see of him is his hand in this scene. But it's enough to tell us that this is a well-dressed black man coming into a small town in Mississippi. Let's see what happens. We actually won't get to see Sidney Poitier's face until several more minutes into this movie. In this scene, that's all you get is his hand. Matilda begins with a slow fade up. And so I'll start it from right here. That's the first 48 frames. I cheated a little bit, but you get the idea, right? 48 frames, 2 seconds, and we have this extreme tight close-up. Do we know the character? No, it raises more questions than it answers, right? We will actually go through 3 more actors portraying this character before we actually get the character that we're going to follow through the second act of this story. So that's all you get. And the extreme tight can do the same thing as an extreme long shot, in that we're going inside out, in this case, instead of outside in. And either one of them, extreme long or extreme tight, can start to arouse curiosity without giving out a lot of information about the character. Yojimbo begins with music over titles, and then that stops, and they're going to fade up on an extreme long shot of the countryside. And then into that shot steps a figure. And I'll give you 48 frames from here. Okay, that's it. We get a close-up of the back of his head, and this is a classic Kurosawa shot with extreme depth of field, where we've got the mountains and the guy in the foreground all in focus at the same time. But all this does is arouse our curiosity. We can see the noble crest on his jacket that tells us that he was a samurai and probably in service to some house, but we don't know much about this guy at all. And actually, this is the character that Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name was directly stolen from. And actually, A Fistful of Dollars is a remake of Yojimbo and The Man with No Name. The beginning of The Big Lebowski starts with a montage introducing the place, and the place is going to be Los Angeles. There we get to Los Angeles, and we get a lot of information about the character that seems contradictory, and that arouses our curiosity. And we end up in this store where we have this extreme forced perspective shot, and now the character is going to move into this space. Okay, that's our introduction to the Big Lebowski. And again, we're in an extreme shot. We can see his costume, which seems somewhat silly. He seems to be wearing a bathrobe and flip-flops and shorts and dark glasses, but we don't really know much about him. Again, this shot arouses curiosity rather than really giving us any real information about the character. There you have 5 shots of 5 main characters, just 2 seconds each. And you can see how every one of these filmmakers has used this technique of a partial image to arouse the curious brain, to make us lean in and start to go through this arc of involvement with the character. If you want to see the full introductions of the characters, watch the deep dive episode where I go into more depth. And then also in my Substack article, I'll actually cite some of the brain research, and you can see some of that if that's interesting to you.